Good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a good morning. Hope you and your family are doing well. I was thinking about ways to make these sermons a little more interactive, and I got to thinking about maybe I should put guesses at the beginning of these that may or may not turn out right. So, Dennis, you put that bowl of cereal down during the sermon, okay? And Kevin, should you really be wearing those pajamas during church? Or Ashley, quit yelling at the kids while I'm trying to speak. You know, I doubled up on names there in case, if it's not one Dennis, it may be the other. Maybe that gives me a better chance. But, you know, I hope these videos are serving you well. I hope they are interactive. I realized with the last one, I went a little long. So I promise I'm going to try not to do that with future ones. I can barely keep people awake for 40 minutes in here, so I know it's probably even harder with the videos. But all joking aside, this morning I wanted to talk about your hope. And I want you to start by thinking about what you're hoping for. I want you to be thinking about that, but I tried to wrestle with several different lead-in questions that maybe I could ask and you would immediately kind of get where I'm going. But I realized that it's different for everyone. And the way we use that word is even different. And let me give you some examples. There may be some people that are hoping right now that things get back to normal quickly. And they may be hoping that so they can go get Mexican cheese dip and sit down at a restaurant. Or maybe it's so that they can start to watch basketball or football on TV again, or baseball. Or maybe they're just hoping that the kids are out of the house and in school soon. But that's one thing. But when you think about the way we talk about this, there's other ways that we talk about this. And this is why it was hard to come up with questions. But right now, there may be some that are counting on the government to figure out the solution for how to control things and how to manage the situation. Maybe some are waiting for science and doctors to come up with cures and vaccines for COVID-19. Or maybe some are just wishing that it could stay like this forever. More time with their family and being less busy. See, when we think about this idea of hope, there's really a lot of different ways that we talk about it. But this morning, I want you to think about your hope. Now, you may be saying, well, why hope? Why do I want you to think about your hope? Well, Hebrews 11, verse 1 says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. There's this connection between faith and hope. The way I like to think of it is that hope is the fuel for your faith. It's kind of that idea like we see with the Gospels that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's this idea that whatever you're putting your hope into, your faith follows that. And this morning I want you to think about your hope. I want you to think about what you're putting your hope on during this time. And the passage I want us to focus on and spend our time looking at is from 1 Peter chapter 3. There's a lot of different reasons that I chose this passage. One is I can't help but read this passage with an evangelism focus. But I think when you read it, maybe you'll see some of those same connections as well. But 1 Peter chapter 3, 14 through 17 is our verse for this morning. I want to read that. But if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. The key phrase that I want us to kind of focus our minds on is that phrase in verse 15, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Now, that's kind of a complicated sentence, and I know when I was growing up, it often got shortened down to being prepared to make a defense. It's kind of that idea of defending the faith, defending the Bible. I think the truth really doesn't need defending. The truth is the truth, whether people accept it or not. However, our faith, by defending our faith, there's a lot of advantage to that. There's a lot of good that can come from that. But so this morning I want to think about this idea of hope, and I want to think about being ready to give an answer for that. But there's a couple of stories I want us to, I just picked a couple from the Old Testament. I'm sure there's more that we could have picked, but I just picked, I thought, 3 that were really good to kind of encapsulate this idea. And I want to go through those stories because I want us to keep these in mind as we get into this passage and look at specific commands and how that plays out for today and for us. But the first story I want us to think of is actually, it's a book, and it's Lamentations. And we talked about this back when we talked about hope once this first started. But this time of the exile and Jerusalem being destroyed and the temple being destroyed was a very trying time for the people of Israel. And we find that a lot of the books of the Old Testament are written around that time because that was when they were trying to figure things out. That's when they were really trying to grasp and know what it meant to be a follower of God through these difficulties. And the book of Lamentations is centered around the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem and just all the chaos and madness that went with that. And right in the middle of the book, there's this beautiful statement. In the middle of all this chaos, in the middle of all this destruction, in the middle of all this bad stuff that happens, in Lamentation chapter 3, 21 through 24, and really this is, I believe, the point of the book, which if it was a separate time, we can go through what it means to lament. But for now, let's just look at this passage. Verse 21 is where we're going to start. The writer says this, "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in Him." You know, if you've had the privilege of singing this song in church, those words just roll right off the tongue. You've got that drilled in your mind. But for many of us, it may come as a shock to know that's right in the middle of a reflection on the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem. You know, here is this hope, this faith in the middle of really circumstances that don't match with that sort of hope and that sort of faith. That's the first story I wanted us to think about. The second one is another common one. It's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And if you don't know this story, it's from the book of Daniel. But these 3 guys, along with Daniel, are really kind of the main characters of the early part of Daniel. And basically, they are taken off into exile, and they're in this foreign land. And in this foreign land, they have a king who sets up this statue, and he wants everyone to worship this statue. And once this whole kind of thing gets started, and this king says, look, everyone's going to worship this statue, we find out that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are not going to worship that statue. And the king had already threatened everybody, said, look, if you do not bow down and worship this statue, you're going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. You're going to be killed for not obeying this command. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they do it anyway. They don't bow down to the statue. They don't worship this idol or this thing that's been set up for them to worship. And instead, they're brought in to be thrown into this fiery furnace. And I want you to see this statement that they make right before they're about to be thrown in, because I think this is key for us to kind of have in our mind as we think about our passage for today. So in Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 through 18, it says this, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, 'O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up.'" Such a beautiful statement right in the middle of really their death sentence. Right when they're about to be taken off to be thrown in this fiery furnace. And for those that don't know the end of the story, they are not burned. They are not destroyed. God does save them. But this is a beautiful reminder that I want us to have as we consider our passage in 1 Peter 3. And then the last one, once again, another very common one, is the story of David and Goliath. You know, for people that may be unfamiliar with this story, you know, essentially, we know this from history that there was this point in time where there was this kind of substitutionary combat, where instead of having 2 armies just fight it out and have all this blood and death, there would be sometimes where they would decide, you send down your best person and you send down your best person, we'll just watch them fight. And we'll just kind of know that if your best beats our best, then, well, you would have won. And this sort of thing kind of happened, whether it was for sport or for serious, you know, it just happened. We know that. But what we see is that the Philistines, they both line up on the side of this valley, and the Philistines send out this giant. And we're seeing all these details about, how big his spear is and how much his armor weighs and all these different kind of things. And David comes up onto the scene in 1 Samuel, and essentially it seems like nobody's willing to go out and fight him. Nobody wants to go out and take that chance, take that responsibility to be that person to stand up to the giant. Well, David, apparently being young and not of the age of war or whatever his reason for not being there, he's like, hey, look, I'll fight this guy. And people are shocked by it, and they're confused, and they're like, wait, you're not going to do it. You're just a shepherd boy. And eventually his request is then brought before the king. And I want you to see the interaction between him and the king here, because I think it's another beautiful reminder and thing to keep in our mind as we consider our passage. But starting in verse 36 of 1 Samuel 17, verse 36, David says this to the king. He says, your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. These three stories, the first one, this reflection on the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. And yet in the middle of that, it says that their hope and their portion is in God. And then we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that facing down death, even though they were staring death in the face, they still were willing to stand up and say, look, we believe in God and we know that God is able to save us. And then we have David, who when many others were not willing to take on the responsibility to fight that giant, he was willing to say, look, God has delivered me from things in the past, and I trust that He can deliver me from this Philistine. These three stories, these three confessions of what their hope, what their faith is in, is a beautiful reminder as we consider this passage. Now on to looking at some of the details of this passage. The first thing I want you to think about is this passage says that we are to give an answer when they ask. But why would they ask? In the context of this verse, it's saying that Christians are being persecuted. And it's saying that, hey, during this persecution, when people ask you for this hope, be ready to give them an answer. You think about our situation right now. Like many other times of trouble, there's a distinct lack of hope in this world. Like I talked about earlier, some of the things that people are putting their hopes and their wishes and their faith in, to be honest, those things are going to fall short. You probably laughed a little bit when I said that the government could control all of this, that it could get things under control and handle the situation. We know how well the governments across the world do at handling things like this. They fall short time and time again. Even science, this great thing that's brought us all this prosperity that we see in the Western world and really throughout the world. Science has done a lot of amazing things and helped solve a lot of problems. But even science and medicine says, hey, 18 months. You've got to wait that long for the vaccine that can really guarantee us a sense of safety from this virus. There's a lot of things that we tend to put our hope in difficult times. But when certain things come along like this, where all of our normal things that we put hope in, money, government, power, fame, whatever it is, a lot of those things tend to dwindle away. And in a time with very little hope, people are looking for hope. And when they see it, that hope can shine like a light in the darkness. Think about the context of the verses that we've read. Like I said, from the one in 1 Peter 3, it's in the context of these Christians who are being persecuted. And I can think of scenes of movies of where people are just wanting and trying so hard to beat down someone and take away all hope that they have. But when they have hope, it's just infuriating to that person. And they have to ask, how is it that you can stand up to all that I'm putting you through? And Peter is telling these people, he's saying, hey, be prepared. Because if your hope is firmly founded, if your faith is firmly founded in Jesus Christ, then you are going to have hope. And people are going to wonder how you can have hope when there seems to be no reason for such a hope. You look at Lamentations. This story of reflection right in the middle of all this destruction, right in the middle of all this pain and agony, but yet they're able to say that they still have hope in the Lord. Even though, think about it. For them, the temple was that defining thing. It was the place where God's presence was. And for them to see that destroyed, it'd be really easy for them to say, look, even my hope in the Lord is weakened. Even my hope in God is not there. But he says, no. I know that God's faithfulness is better than that. You think about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were willing to stand up when no one else was. Whether they were afraid of the fiery furnace, whether they were afraid of the king himself, or whatever their reason was for not being willing to stand up, they were the only three that did not bow down. And yet, that stood out so much. Yes, they were being put on trial. They were being ready to be thrown into that furnace. But yet, they had this platform to share the hope that they have, that God could save them from whatever fiery furnace. No matter how hot it was, God could deliver. And then David, no one was willing to face that giant. No one was willing to stand up and take that responsibility. But David, knowing that God had taken care of him in the past, he says, hey, I have faith and a hope, even though no one else does. In this situation that we're in, we have the opportunity to be a beacon of hope. We have the opportunity to shine light in the darkness. When people don't know where to turn and don't know what to put their faith in, we can be that lighthouse in the storm. Are people asking you about your hope? Is your hope standing out in the crowd? Is your hope different from the hope of everyone else through this difficult time? That's a difficult question that we all have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves. Is the way that I'm handling this different than the world? Is the hope that I have something greater than all of those hopes that I mentioned at the beginning? Is somehow I'm able to do what this passage is talking about, where it's obvious that my lifestyle is so different that people come to me and ask, how are you handling this so well? How are you anchored through this time of storm? How is it that you have hope, even though circumstances would say there is no hope? Is it possible that our hopes are the exact same as the rest of the world? Is that why we don't have people asking? Is that why we're not looking any different than everyone else? I think it's probably something that we all need to ask ourselves very seriously. Is our hope truly in something beyond our circumstance? Now, before we move on to the last part of this, there's something that I need to take a quick second to explain and to kind of address the difference between hope and optimism. See, optimism and hope, they sound similar in a lot of ways, but optimism is not something you should be putting your faith in. For example, I'm optimistic of the Atlanta Falcons' football chances, right? And that's fine to be optimistic about that. And you could say it's probably misplaced optimism. That's fine. But it would be really, really sad if I put my faith in that. If I built my life around that. When everything else was falling around me, I put my faith in something like that. See, optimism is the weakest form of hope. It's a hope that really doesn't even stand up for that hope. But see, hope, true hope, should lead to faith. It should be that we are beacons of this kind of hope and faith, this deep rootedness in these promises that go beyond circumstances, as opposed to just a beacon of shallow optimism. We don't need to just be, here's this optimistic view of everything. We need to point people to something beyond optimism. We need to point them to the hope that we have through Jesus Christ. That's what I think that we need to be ready to give an answer for. Now, let's move on to that. Be prepared to give an answer. Be prepared to make a defense. This passage gives us a couple of qualifiers before it even gets into, us thinking about it. We need to consider these. We need to do it with gentleness, like the verse says. We don't just beat people over the head with why our faith is in the right thing and theirs may not be. But instead we do it gently, realizing that at one point we may have been just like them. We do it with respect. We do it respecting the fact that they and their situation is different. And we need to approach them in that sort of gentleness that we saw before and respecting that person for who that they are. And then finally, we do it with a good conscience. We do it knowing that we're not putting forward some fake, shallow thing that someone else told us, but instead we do it in all honesty and all truth with a clean conscience. Think about some of the hopes and reasons from our stories before. Why was that writer of Lamentations able to say that his hope was in God? Even though everything around him looks doom and gloom, the writer of Lamentations says that God's mercy and love never ceases, and that his relationship with him is all that he needs. See, even through these difficult times, they were able to put their hope in God. Think about David. David directly tells us, what does he say? He says, look, God has done it before. He's delivered me from the lion and the bear. God can deliver me from this Philistine. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said that God is able to do something that even if they asked, God, just like that verse says, God is able to do immeasurably more than what we ask or think. And they were willing to put their faith in that. Because even though they were staring down that fiery furnace, they said, hey, God is able to save. Even if they qualified it, right? Even if they said, look, it may not happen that he decides to do that. They still knew that if God was going to, that he could. That God could not be thwarted from any of his purposes. See, these are great reasons, and these are things that you should think about. And even though, I could just give you some little package statement, I really can't and shouldn't try to give you this perfect prepared answer for when people ask about your hope. That's not how it should be. But being prepared gets you to think about your hope. What is your hope in? Why do you have hope? What are you putting your faith in through this time? See, I think a truthful, honest, genuine answer will go further than any beautifully crafted statement that I could hand over to someone else. See, we're going through difficult times right now. And my challenge is for us to be thinking about what is it that we're putting our hope in. And as we close right now, I want to give you some things that, just a quick little list that I came up with of some things that I'm hoping for during this difficult time. See, one of the hopes that I have is, we end it with each video. We look forward to the time that we can be together. And we know that with how things are going to roll out, that churches in big groups of hundreds or more may be something that's put off till the very end. But see, my hope is that even if something so bad happens to where we could not reunite on this earth, I know we will reunite one day with God. We say that and we declare that every time we take communion, that Jesus said himself, he'll take it again the day when he takes it with us in heaven. We look forward to that day when we can take communion, not just with each other, but with Christ himself. And we know that at that point, that time of togetherness cannot be taken away from us. That is something that I hope for and look forward to. The other thing that I hope for is that knowing that even if this virus wasn't here right now, each and every one of us at some point in our life will face some sort of sickness. And it'll probably be some that scare us, and it'll probably be some that take our life because of a sickness. But see, I have hope that one day sickness will be no more. That's a hope that I have during this time, that no matter how bad COVID-19 or whatever the next virus is or gets, there is a day promised of where sickness will be no more and pain will be no more. That's something that I hope for. Regardless of a physical outcome like death, we talked about it in our hope sermon a couple of weeks ago. I have a hope in resurrection. That whatever the worst thing that could happen to my body is, I have a hope that one day my body will be raised in a glorious new way that's unlike the body that you see in front of you now. And we don't fully understand what that's going to be like, but I have a hope that Jesus Christ, because he was the first to be raised, I one day will be raised as well. Those are sort of some long-term hopes, but there's a hope that I have through this difficult time. There's a hope that I have in the midst of all this COVID-19 stuff. And that's that the kingdom will grow. that God's will is done, that more people will come to know and put their faith in God through this time. You know, that's my reason for sharing this sermon right now, is that we have an opportunity when there is such a lack of hope in the world. If we are strong in our faith, if we plant our hopes in the promises of Christ through the Scriptures, if we build our lives on those things, we have an opportunity to be a beacon to the world around us. We have an opportunity to show people that they don't have to put their hope and their faith in government and science and all these things that ultimately someday in one way or another will fall short. But instead, they can put their hope in God. Something that we see in the Scripture, that we believe He continually comes through in His promises. And we see in our life that God continually comes through in His promises in our life. And we put our hope and our trust and our faith in His promises. That is my hope through this crisis, that if Christians are faithful in their calling, if we are truly prepared to give an answer for the hope that we have, God's kingdom can grow regardless of how difficult the world around us gets. God's kingdom can grow even though the church is unable to meet physically in this building. God's kingdom can grow regardless of the circumstances that we think are stopping the world around us. That is what my hope is in. So this morning, I want you to think about what your hope is in. You know, I made that statement, that's what my hope is in. Does that mean I always act like it? No. But I want you and myself to challenge and think about, what is it that I'm acting in? What am I putting my faith in? What am I putting my hope in? I want us to examine that, because I think whatever we put our hope in, wherever we put our treasure, our heart and our life and our faith is going to follow. And I want us to think about that. I want us to live a life that people can look at us and say that our hope is in something different, that our faith is in something other than what the world is putting their faith in. And ultimately, I want us to all be prepared to give an answer. And I hope that someone will ask you about your hope. And I pray that we are prepared to give an answer that brings glory to God, that furthers His kingdom, that hopefully steers someone in the direction of putting their trust and their faith in Jesus as their Lord. If that's you, you're watching this video, Jesus is not your Lord, let me tell you, all the other things you can put your faith in this world, it will fail. One way or another, one time or another, those things will fall short. But the one thing I found in my life that has not fallen short is my faith in God. And I pray that God opens your heart and you decide to follow that faith as well. You decide to call Jesus as your Lord. If that's something you want to know more information about, reach out to us. We would love to be a part of that process for you. Or if you're a Christian and you realize that your hope is not where it should be, you know, I know it's difficult. I know it's not easy to reach out to people when you know you need to, but please reach out to one of us. And look, we're in this together. You know, we're all going to struggle in many different ways, but don't think you have to struggle alone. God sees you. And even though we may not, we want to be there to help you through whatever you're going through. If you have a need, whether it's one of those things I just mentioned, or you just need groceries, or you just need somebody to talk to over the phone, please do not hesitate to reach out and to talk to one of us. We look forward to the day when we can all be back together. That whether it's in this building or in heaven with Christ Himself, we all hope and long for that day. And my prayer is that we grow in these hopes, that we grow in our faith in the promises of God, and that we are ready to give an answer for when people ask about the hope that we have. May the Lord bless you.